stepped off the train at 8 a.m. Having searched the thesaurus in vain for adjectives, I must, as a substitute, apply me to comparison in the form of a recipe. Take of London fog 30 parts, malaria 10 parts, gas leaks 20 parts, dewdrops gathering in a brickyard at sunrise 25 parts, odor of honeysuckle 15 parts. Mix. The mixture will give you an approximate conception of a Nashville drizzle. It is not so fragrant as a mothball, nor as thick as pea soup, but 'tis enough. 'Twill serve. That is an opening to O. Henry's famous story, A Municipal Report, based on his 1903 trip to Nashville, Tennessee. In 1903, Union Station was the beating heart of Nashville. Visitors old and young, far and near, would all arrive to Nashville through that beautiful work of art. Today, however, millions arrive through an airport that leads to a 15-minute drive on I-40. Nashville is the third largest U.S. city with zero intercity rail connection, just behind Las Vegas and Columbus, Ohio. Now in 2028, Las Vegas is expected to finish Brightline, which will bump Nashville up to the second largest city. How did a city like Nashville, in the heart of America, lose this intercity passenger rail? Well, let's go back to 1850 and the L&N Railroad. In the 1850s, the L&N Railroad built a line connecting Louisville and Nashville, and pretty soon after, the N&C Railroad connecting Nashville and Chattanooga was built. Now, in the 1860s, with the Civil War, the Nashville and Chattanooga line was pretty severely damaged, so L&N and N&C merged, while N&C was able to retain most of its rights as a company, most of its freedoms. In the 1890s, a man named Eugene C. Lewis would become the mastermind behind the train station we know and love today. Now, in 1897, Tennessee held the Centennial Exposition. It coined itself as the Athens of the South. Today, we still have a remaining Parthenon from part of that project. Eugene C. Lewis was a major contributor to the builder of the fair, and ultimately he moved this statue, the statue of Mercury, from the Centennial Exposition to Union Station. One of my favorite Union Station details are these two bas-reliefs above the fireplace in the lobby. One is Miss Nashville, the daughter of Eugene C. Smith, chief engineer of Nashville and Chattanooga line, and the other is Miss Louisville, the daughter of chief engineer Milton Smith of the Louisville and Nashville line. The man who designed Union Station was by the name of Richard Munford. He studied at the Royal College of Science in Dublin. He was inspired by a man named H.H. Richardson, who designed the Allegheny County Courthouse in Pittsburgh. Major Lewis's granddaughter, Pauline Folk, had this to say: "He liked beautiful things. The architect in charge of the plans for Union Station had worked for the railroad for 20 years, but I'm sure that Grandpa watched and covered all his ideas of the things that were put in place. I'm sure that he never gave the architect a minute's rest. It pained him to see something done sloppily. His idea was something beautiful." Now, there are three original features missing from the modern day building that are quite fascinating. The first is the train shed. It would cover here to there, and at the time was the longest single-span gable roof, 200 feet long. It was big enough to hold 10 full-size trains beneath it. Now, in 1996, tragedy struck. It burned, and the entire roof was scrapped, just leaving a metal wire. And in 2001, they ultimately tore down the whole thing due to unsafe conditions. The second fascinating fact about Union Station were the alligator pools. Yes, those were real. It's not a myth. Down at the track level, you can see covered up tracks, there were 2 pools full of 3 to 4 foot alligators. Now it's believed that Major Giddis, one of the superintendents for the station, brought these alligators back during his 6-week winters in St. Pete, Florida. Miss Folk, great-granddaughter of Lewis, believed that the pools were of his doing. Now, the 2 pools were heated by water from the boiler room, and in the winter they were kept in a little tank in the basement. It's believed that they were ultimately scrapped around World War I. Last people remember seeing them was about 1918, 1919. But the memory lives on. Now, if we look up at that clock, that is not the original clock. The original one was put there right around when the station was built, 1900. And at the time, it was the only digital clock in existence. It was ultimately scrapped around World War I as well because it just didn't work that good. When the station first opened, the area surrounding it was mostly high-end residential. All throughout here, the Gulch was fine homes, big grand homes. A couple blocks that way down 8th, all the way up to Commerce, 7th to Commerce, 6th, even Broadway down had fine homes along it. Where the federal building and post office are today was mostly hotels, souvenir shops, beer taverns, pre-prohibition of course. And then from Union down way past West End Boulevard was mostly low-end housing. Needed to run a quick side quest. Beyond the extensive streetcar system running through East Nashville to the Nation's neighborhood down to Hillsborough Village, 12 South, there was an extensive local train system as well. Franklin, Smyrna, Springfield, Dixon, Gallatin, Murfreesboro, Belmead, and Lebanon, the one train line existing, were all connected through this system, and ultimately Union Station. Some of the biggest cultural events of the city happened around the train station, including 1907 visit of Teddy Roosevelt to speak at Peabody College, and just a few years later, President Taft came to visit town as well. Union Station's significance in the city went beyond just the trains, however, and the people possibly arriving on the trains. There was a restaurant inside, one of the nicest restaurants in the city. White tablecloth, fine china, waiters, they served steaks and hams and just gaudy, delicious food. On the flip side, if you weren't one of the ultra wealthy, there was a lunchroom, another local favorite for train station workers, local rail yard workers, residents. It was just a gathering hub. People would come here before or after dances. They would come here after church on Sunday. It was the beating heart of Nashville in its early days. The year 1918 was a dark year for Nashville. 1918 marked a dark year for Nashville history. World War I was raging. The Spanish flu was taking the lives of young and old, and the worst, deadliest train accident in history occurred here. The newspaper report from the time read, because somebody blundered, at least 121 persons were killed and 57 injured. Shortly after 7 o'clock on Tuesday morning, when Nashville, Chattanooga, and St. Louis Railway passenger trains number 1 from Memphis and number 4 from Nashville crashed head-on together just around the sharp, steep-graded curve at Dutchman's Bend, about 5 miles from the city near the Harding Road. The two trains collided head-on at about 60 miles per hour, knocking both the engines off the track, but allowing the express car from the northbound train to plow through multiple wooden cars of the southbound train. The cause of the accident was ultimately blamed on Engineer Kennedy and his communication between him and the towerman and switch engineer. The towerman had given him the all clear for the trains, but quickly realizing his mistake gave him a red board and desperately tried to attract his attention, to no avail. Unfortunately, about 80% of the victims were black men en route to the Old Hickory gunpowder plant. This gunpowder plant was a major employer of Nashville at the time. It enlisted about 30,000 men to support the war effort. Due to the rapid collapse of the train cars, most of these men were spared with instant deaths. Following World War I was truly Union Station's heyday. It was a great time to hold a job there. The train riding experience was excellent, efficient, trains ran on time. Ellen Allen Sullivan, a regular guest of Union Station, put it this way: train service was fabulous then. The Pullman porters, the dining car waiters, everyone was courteous, polite, and helpful. It was a joy to travel then. It was elegant, and the service was excellent. Working for the railroad was a career. Fathers passed this down to their sons. And for black men, being a Pullman porter was one of the best jobs you could hold. E.K. Schaffer, who began working for the railroad as a pipe fitter, put the time period this way: there was not a turnover. It seemed that when men were employed with the railroad, they made it a lifetime career, so to speak. At that particular time, there was not anything known as a pension, so men worked, really, until they fell in the harness. One of my addictions is LaCroix. I have one a day, and I have like 3 left. These are troubling times to be in. Some of the best Union Station stories were during the 1920s. I do remember standing on the corner where the so-called human spider crawled the face of the Union Station. This was a great event, and most people were there to see him fall. However, he didn't. He reached the top and came back down. It made a great impression on me as a boy of 13, 14. The spider would climb buildings all over the place, and he picked out the Union Station. I remember going there as a boy and seeing a dead whale that was put on exhibition in a boxcar. You could smell it all the way to Church Street. It was a big thing to go see a dead whale. I'd never been to the ocean. My father and I went down to see the whale, and we took every kid in the neighborhood in an A-model Ford car. I think it cost 25 cents. They had lights strung up, kept it a day or two. They would bring things like that to Union Station to keep on exhibition. They made up the parade with their display wagons and elephants and all. The parade would form out there, and it would come down Broadway from Centennial Park. Then it would come on past the Union Station, circle up Fifth Avenue, and go back out Church Street. They would have 3 or 4 bands, big band wagons. They'd have the big wagons with the glass sides with snakes. Then, of course, the animals, the bears, the lions, the elephants, and the clowns. And then the rides on horseback. The post office next door was built in 1934. It was dedicated during that year by FDR, came to town. One of his major public works projects, employed thousands of local Nashvillians, and gave us this beautiful building. In 2004, it became the Frist Center for the Visual Arts, and today it's known as the Frist Art Museum. One of my favorite little details is this big concrete block. It was originally created as a passageway between the post office and Union Station. When the post office had moved to the airport, it was boarded up and passenger rail no longer carried mail. December 7th, 1941 marked the day the U.S. became involved in World War II. By the end of that week, Red Cross had taken over the lobby of Union Station. Soldiers began flooding in. Every single roll in the hotel had 3 shifts a day, 24/7 activity. Soldiers were sleeping on the track, platforms, on benches, on steps, anywhere they could find. At the present-day site of Hundred Oaks Mall, there were continually about 10,000 Air Force men screening at the Air Classification Center. The entire screening process for the Air Force happened at this center. About 10,000 Air Force were at the Air Transport Command Center, 67,000 at Tullahoma, 50,000 at Fort Campbell, and there were about 10 to 20,000 troops spread across central Tennessee as part of the Tennessee Maneuvers area. It was used as a training ground for war because it closely resembles Germany, Belgium, France. One thing many people specifically remember about Union Station were the German and Italian prisoners of war. About 15 to 20 carloads one day rode through on their way to Camp Tucker, Alabama, and Tullahoma. One day, in 1952, the Mercury statue atop the Union Station Tower fell onto the tracks, crumpled, and wasted. Between 1945 and 1964, non-commuter passenger rail was down by about 84%. The suburban life, the interstate system, and the growing plane transport network promised ultimate freedom in travel. The 1950s saw the conversion of rail from steam to diesel. By 1955, there were only about 25 trains going in and out of Union Station. By 1966, less than 2% of intercity travelers went by passenger rail. Ellen Wallace, a longtime Nashville rail rider, put it this way: "One of the joys of traveling by train to me was just to sit and look out the window. You got such a sense of the country you were going through, more than you get when you were flying or when you were driving. And then at the stations, the families would all be down there meeting people, and you got a sense of community and family and belonging that you don't get in an airport." I was always interested in the crops and what was being raised and how things were going. May 1st, 1971 was the death of private passenger rail as we know it. That was the day Amtrak took over. In 1971, there was only one line still going through Nashville's Union Station, the Floridian, a line from Chicago to Miami. Because of this, Jimmy Carter was extremely close to cutting it, but there was a short-lived savior, Al Gore. There's something about moving along and looking out that window, eating in a dining car, maybe sleeping on the train and waking up, looking out the window and you see a whole new town, and watching the countryside go by. It's magical. But unfortunately for the Floridian, the writing was long on the wall. Congress was subsidizing that line at about $150 per passenger at a loss of 13.5 cents a mile. Another thing contributing to this untimely death was the end of passenger rail mail cars. In 1977, the last mail car to ever be attached to a passenger train was ridden between New York City and DC. In 1986, Nashville would officially move its post office hub from the train station to the Nashville airport. And so, on October 8th, 1979, Al Gore rode the last Floridian, the last to ride through Nashville Union Station. Most of the quotes I've used were captured from a project between 1976 and 1977 led by Miss Fletch Koch and the Junior League of Nashville Oral History. They interviewed about 112 people in some kind of association with Union Station and just listened to what they had to say. The book to come out of this was called Speaking of Union Station. It was released in 1977, and the book proceeds were all put towards the Union Station Trust Fund. We should be eternally grateful to Miss Koch and her team for the work they put into this project and ultimately bringing Union Station into the public light once again. We may not have had this building today if it were not for them. In 1979, L&N Railroad sold Union Station to GSA, General Services Administration. And in 1985, they sold it to the Metro government of Nashville and Davidson County. After having sat abandoned now for about 7-8 years, in 1986, a $14.4 million renovation converted Union Station into a 136-room hotel. Now, that hotel was troubled from the start. The restaurant inside closed in July of 1988, and the hotel went bankrupt in December of that same year. Now, they were able to be bailed out. They drugged themselves up in 1990 and reopened. But it was the 2006 to 2007 corporate overhaul with an $11 million renovation that really turned it into what it is today, a Marriott boutique hotel. One interesting thing about surrounding Union Stations, the St. Louis, the Nashville, and Chattanooga Union Stations have all been converted into hotels in recent years. Unlike St. Louis, however, both Nashville and Chattanooga are still disconnected from the intercity rail network. One can only pray that sometime in the near future, Atlanta, Chattanooga, Nashville, and over to Memphis are all reconnected. September 18th, 2006, the inaugural ride from Lebanon Station to Nashville, Tennessee. 1,000 passengers on board, 32 miles, 50 minutes, 4 stops. This was all part of an ambitious plan in the 90s to create the Music City Star System, connecting Lebanon, Gallatin, Murfreesboro, Columbia, Clarksville even, all on a rail network, historical rail network. I just talked to the conductor and he said I am the only person on board for this 8 a.m. trip to Lebanon. Part of doing this project meant that I had about half a day to spend in Lebanon before I could take the train back. And I ended up getting coffee, lunch, took a gander at the Lebanon Local History Museum as well, and also a couple really cool books I'm excited about. I got these two. So Eric Larson, he wrote the book Devil in the White City about the 1897 World's Fair. Great nonfiction. Writes like a novel. And then The Gilded Age. It was only $1, so thought why not? Seems interesting. Yeah, just a pleasant day. Unfortunately, I kind of exhausted everything I wanted to do about an hour ago. So just sitting here finishing up the book I've been reading for a while. It's 800 pages of 62 20th century short stories, and my word, they're amazing, but just waiting for the train. Now, the Lebanon to Nashville route was initially chosen because it was by far the cheapest route to upgrade to passenger rail. Unfortunately, it would also be the only one started of the plan. There was a push in 2018 to try to revive the project and get more train systems going, but ultimately it flopped at the polls. They wanted to expand rail, bus rapid transit, and bus frequency, and the voters just weren't having it. But at last, in 2024, our new mayor, O'Connell, pushed a plan called the Choose How You Move plan. And for the first time, we're gonna have 24/7 bus service, build 86 miles of new sidewalks. He was able to secure $1.4 billion in federal funds. But still, rail has a bleak future. My beautiful Edward Hopper, the diner socks. Also, let me talk about the love of my life, this Spalding bike. It's an 80s mountain bike that I got on Facebook Marketplace for $65. Chef's kiss. With an average speed of 37 miles per hour, Monday through Friday, morning and evening service only, it only draws in a few hundred riders a day, making the WeGo Star the least ridden passenger rail line